This meeting will now come to order, and I will mission statements. The Education Professional Standards Board, in full collaboration and cooperation with its education partners, promotes high levels of student achievement by establishing and enforcing rigorous professional standards for preparation, certification, and responsible and ethical behavior of all professional educators in Kentucky. Serving as board secretary is Ms. Chester. Ms. Chester, please call the roll.
Amanda Ellis. Susan Reaver, present. Diane Berry, present. Elijah Edwards. Kathy Gunn, present. Tracy Hunt. Jacqueline Mayfield. Corinne Murphy, present. Meredith Pittman, present. Amber Snell, present. Wade Stanfield.
Present.
Julie Hopkins, Timothy Wooster.
Timothy Whisper, present.
Vice Chair Whitman. Sarah Whitman, present. Chair Mitchell.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Chester, has anyone signed up for open speak?
No.
All right. Well, this morning, Associate Commissioner Byron Darnell joins us on behalf of Commissioner Glass. I will now recognize Dr. Darnell to give the reports of the commissioner.
Morning, everyone. Most important, thank you for your patience. Dr. Glass is not here this morning, obviously, but I have with me Mr. Brian Perry, who is over our government affairs and is going to give you just a brief update on behalf of the commissioner.
Good morning. So just a quick update on legislative sessions coming up in just a couple of months now. So just as a kind of set the stage a little bit, November 8th is the general election. The Republicans have majorities in both of our state chambers. I don't think that anyone's expecting that to change post-election. However, we will see a number of new faces in the state Senate, enter some retirements, so more than normal. And then in the House, we'll probably see a quarter of the 100 seats there turn over. So it's about in line with what we'd expect. We'll also see a number of leadership changes in the House, and this is something that everyone's sort of waiting to see how it all shakes out. You remember back to the primaries, you had several Northern Kentucky chairmen get primary and lose. So that's kind of creating a bit of a shuffle, and then Chad McCoy, who's part of House leadership, retired. So that opens up a seat on leadership. And so those dominoes will all start to fall here soon. And we'll see how that all plays out. One of the other open leadership positions is the House Ed Chair. So Chair Regina Huff is retiring. So we will definitely have a new House Ed Chair. And then over in the Senate, we probably won't have a new chair anytime soon, but we could have a new chair down the road because the current chair, Senator Max Wise, is joining the Kelly Craft ticket as the lieutenant governor nomination. That's obviously a very crowded primary right now, so we'll see where that goes. But that's kind of all the things that are happening ahead of the session. As we look ahead to the session in terms of priorities, I think there's several things that are happening. One, the KBE will vote this week, I think, at their meeting on their legislative agenda for the 23 session. And really, it'll kind of carry over to 24. So in terms of cycles in Frankfurt, they just passed a biennial budget. They just took effect July 1. That'll go through June 30 of 24. So we'll see a new biennial budget in the 24 session. So the priorities and goals, some of them will really bleed over into the 24 budget session just because of what can get done in a short session, which is this upcoming 23 session, in the budget session in 24. So, but anyway, their agenda will hopefully be kind of finalized this week. We'll be able to talk more about that after that. In terms of the legislature, I think we're seeing two really big priorities kind of come into focus as it relates to education. One is a Parents' Bill of Rights or a Parental Rights Bill. You've probably seen some talk online about this if you're following along. It's not really a surprise to anybody. The other side of that is the school safety bill that we fully expect to come related to the Uvalde shooting back in the spring. We've been in kind of conversations with both of those, more so on the school safety side. I think there's an interest among the board and the commissioner on expanding the school safety tip line, which has existed for quite a while now, but is really just a kind of a basic notification system, and expanding that to include some sort of access to mental health. And so there's been some conversations in the House, especially on bringing a state of Utah style app to Kentucky. So that's on the radar. We've had some conversations about that, but it's still not exactly clear what the school safety bill would look like. But those are, I would say, the top two education priorities right now. Obviously, we're still a few months away, so reserve the right to change that later on. In terms of the KBE and the commissioner, kind of some of their priorities, the big one that we've been talking about is teacher recruitment and retention. Obviously, this is not going to surprise anybody in this room, but we have been having a lot of conversations about this and how do we address this more systemically. And so we have forward a few recommendations already related to this. So one of those is revamping the existing teacher scholarship. So there is a teacher scholarship that is currently on the books, but it's a conversion scholarship that no one is real wild about. And so we have talked about how that could be revamped to be more like the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship, which is already out there for top high five demand fields. There has been some conversation about opening that up to include a teacher pathway. So those are kind of two different ideas on how you could lower the cost of getting an education to get folks into the pipeline. Getting them through the pipeline, if you watch the commissioner present back in June to the Interim Joint Commission on Education, heard a lot of talk about names for student teaching, right? And how do you, what would that look like? How can we do that? So we put forward a few different thoughts on that, and kind of give them a couple of ideas to think about in terms of cost, because that's what it all comes down to, right? You know, how much they want to spend. But we gave them a couple options for that. And then on the back end, how do you kind of support the master teacher models? I think the commissioner usually refers to it. And so we put forward some ideas on expanding the access to the education. So those are all ideas we can toss around. Meanwhile, CASA has the Kentucky Association for School Administrators has pulled together a really big group of folks, a lot of stakeholders, and they are talking through the same sort of issues, right? And so they're hoping to put forward some recommendations ahead of the session. Candidly, I don't know if those recommendations will get pulled together in time for the 23 session, or whether those suggestions may be presented next interim with an eye toward the 24 session, which would also mean they could attach some price tags to things as the legislature starts to think about how they want to divvy up high in 24. So in any case, there are a lot of folks thinking about this. It's certainly a priority for KDE as well as everybody else. And I'm hoping that we can take a couple of small steps in this upcoming session, like revamp the scholarship, so that sort of low-hanging fruit. And then come back in 24 and really try to put some money toward this. That's not unprecedented. So this session in the budget that just passed, we saw a big push for the healthcare workforce initiative. That's running through CPE as well as KCTCS. But I think the total price tag there was maybe close to 10 million. So that's big. That's a lot. And so hopefully there'll be something similar for teacher recruitment and retention, probably in 24, because it's unlikely that we'll do a lot. I think the budget will get open this session, but I think it'll be very narrow in scope. So I don't think that we should be thinking that they'll do this then. But I think there's a good chance for us to make a push for it in 24. Obviously, you all have something on the agenda today that's a hot topic right now for a lot of legislatures. That's the Praxis exam. So I'm very interested to hear your conversation today. I think that it'll be exciting to hear you all talking about it, and interested in where that conversation goes. We also got an email late last week that several legislators have heard from constituents, including K groups, about adjusting requirements to be a sub. So I have forwarded that on to staff. But with the fall break, I think folks are just now kind of getting around to emails that were sent, especially in the last week. So looking forward to hearing kind of thoughts on that. But that's now on the radar. So we'll see about that. That's kind of the quickish overview of what's coming up. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Thank you.
Now we'll invite Susan Reaver on behalf of the cabinet to provide an update and report.
Thank you. I really don't have much to update other than they have recently hired on Beth Brindley as Deputy Secretary over Workforce. And some of you may have known her in the past. She worked under Steve Bashir. She's fantastic. Looking really forward to working on Workforce and Education side. That's all for me.
Outstanding. It's good to have you here. And I think it's back to me. Well, first off, I just want to reiterate how outstanding the members of this board are and the time that they give just for all things educator quality and preparation and just the standard that we set. So your time is valuable. Also, for those that were able to join us yesterday, extremely thankful for just the work session opportunity. I want to give due credit to Council Trueblood and Ms. Sharon Chester for getting us here and making sure we're ready to go for meeting day, and then also the individuals from OELE that you're going to hear from on various issues to come before the board today. So just lead with thanks on that. What I think is most important for me is, or brings me the best joy, is that everyone in this room has a heart for education, educator, and most importantly, our students. And unfortunately, we fight an uphill battle when it comes to this. But here today in this room, we have guests, we have all of us that are here that are continuing to set a precedent that this is extremely important and needed. So I feel like when I get asked to go speak, I'm often like the bearer of bad news. I was talking about the teacher shortages, and that's on refrain and repeat. So honestly, today, I just wanted to give you all some celebrations because we need it and they're there. We just don't amplify them enough. So our technical difficulties aside, I will try to just do this verbally, although I did have some nice slides for you. I will just point out that first off, we have the Teachers Advisory Council. We just named new representatives from across the state. This council serves as an advisory to the commissioner, provides feedback, and serves just as a voice for teachers across the state. We also just opened our Go Teach KY Ambassador program. So individuals, we usually have at least 20, possibly 25 that serve in an ambassador capacity. They are there as just that, champions of the profession. They get to go to recruitment fairs. They write blogs. There is a meager stipend associated with it. Love for that. I like all things to be more, but there is at least a little bit of compensation to it. But they really are flag bearers for our profession. And so there's a new window. We have a new group that comes in each year. And so now that application is open. If you saw just my days are mixed up due to fall break, but just prior to fall break, the 2023 Teacher of the Year, Ms. Mandy Perez, was announced as well. And so she will become our national representative. And there were 24 others that were recognized as well in the Capitol Rotunda in a very nice ceremony. And so, again, just credit to the individuals that were nominated and those that were chosen. Then we also have the P3, which is the administrative support side. It's a small team of 3, but they hustle hard, and they're reaching out to administrators. They have office hours. They're doing a podcast. They put together a principal calendar. And so there's just not a lot of support that reaches out across the state. And P3 is really the only anchor as far as the statewide connection to that. And just always wanting to highlight their work because it's extremely important for the administrators. And then also just prior to 2 weeks ago, was very fortunate to go to the Continuous Improvement Summit put on by KDE, the Office of Continuous Improvement. And with John Pace out of the Division of Educator, Recruitment and Development, we did 2 sessions on the Grow Your Own and the Ed Rising. Very honored that it was a full house and was well received. And so again, we're just trying to spread the word of, these are action steps that we must take, that we need to be thinking about. That if we have no short-term solution to sort of the imminent needs, or not any good ones. And I think our emergency certifications rising signifies that. And it's not that those individuals may not be outstanding, but we just know that if it's an emergency certified individual, the preparation is not there. I mean, you're learning on the job, as you are in other routes as well. So best case scenario is that we have fully prepared, or let me rephrase that, as fully prepared as you can be to walk into a classroom in order to provide all the students the best possibility for succeeding. Definitely want to give due credit to our certification department. I wish you could see this graph, but we have the new platform, which is the Kentucky Educator Credentialing System. And just to let you know, in August alone, they processed 8,436 applications. And that is double what they did in August last year. So while it is a new system and certainly there are kinks to work out, it is gaining momentum and hopefully will be simpler and more modern, if you will. And we have some nice features, I think, that will come into play, such as, I know for me, it's hard to remember when does my certificate come due. It's easy to forget that. You have 5 years. So, a notification 6 months in advance that says, hey, you are going to be due. So that way I don't wait until June 29th to panic. I'm not renewing my certification, but they've worked very hard. It's been a timely, time-consuming process, but they are seeing the benefits of it. Also, they are doing real-time applications now. So unless it's gone to a need for review or it's an incomplete, they are processing same-day applications now, which is ideal and amazing for this time of year, given the rush that comes from July and August. The one thing that I certainly want to show you or I wanted to show you, Mr. Harrod provided some information to me, and it was very helpful regarding our student-to-teacher placement trend data. So for 5-year data, I wish I could show you that the chart was going like this. Unfortunately, I have to show you that it's going like this. So from 2017-18, in our KVETS entry process, there was 1,780 student teaching placements. For the 21-22 year, there were 1,532. And so you can kind of see that it is gravitating toward the lower end, and naturally, we all have great concern about this, but just as a little bit of data to give you in terms of, and again, this is just student teaching placements. So hopefully they're matriculating to full-time positions, but we do know that this isn't a guarantee that these individuals will arrive in a classroom. So we do have attrition that occurs within those numbers as well. I do know that our programs are showing signs of improvement and enrollment, and we just certainly want to applaud that and just maintain and keep them excited about the profession and the opportunities that await them. Another thing that Mr. Perry was talking about, Councilor Trueblood and myself have been invited to work with the CASA Council. The coalition's broad-based. This is going to be really, I think, more of a year long, but we've been invited to be a part of that and are welcoming and thankful. But one thing that I want to highlight for you, we have now 9 pathways to certification in the alternate routes. And while the 9th is still, we'll be talking about that today. We don't have an official program on that, but of the routes over the last 5 years, for option 1 through 8, and then the proficiency option as well. So you can technically tag that on as a 9th. The total certifications for 5 years through these routes, 8,463. We have 42,000 approximately 600-ish teachers in Kentucky. This is a very, I'm sorry,
Say that last number again.
42,600-ish, I want to say 626, fluctuating a little bit, or 525. But you get the picture. This is a very, very small percentage of our overall FTE and certified. Now, I believe we have, we need to be innovative. We need to be opening doors for individuals that want to come into teaching. I'm an option 6 pathway. So it was very fortunate for me to have that. But overall, the majority of our workforce is still coming from the traditional university-based routes. And so while we're committed to making these options work and to providing you all with the information about these options, because that's what we're tasked with doing, and you all are tasked with deciding, this is not going to fill the gap, is the message that Mr. Perry, Dr. Glass, that we're trying to convey, that we need to be reinforcing our university pipelines and making the profession attractive for our younger individuals. So just a little bit of insight on the information that we're trying to use to promote the teacher recruitment efforts in the state. And I just thank you for the opportunity to give you a little bit of an update today. So
Thank you so much for sharing.
2 questions.
Yeah, sure.
Do you know what the total number of teachers is in the state of Kentucky? You mentioned 42,000.
that's the total number. I want to say it's 42,000. It's either 525 or 626. I
A
can't
total
remember.
teachers, so not people,
Correct.
sir. Okay, so only that 8,400.
Well, no, that's the total altogether.
Okay.
So so for example, in 2021, 2,070 came through alternate routes. So of that full number, you have 2,000-ish that are comprised of alternate routes.
And then the student teaching placements, did that include the alternative certifications as well, or is that just the
It
traditional?
should be any student teaching
Okay.
placement that university has to document. But if their option now,
Is it they?
but reminder, if it's option 6 or one of the other options, then they're teacher record. So
Right.
they're not student teaching. So really,
So it may not include them.
it really, I'm trying to run through, it wouldn't include any of the alternate routes,
Okay.
given the nature that they are on the job in most cases. Yeah, great question for clarification.
Any other questions? Dr. Murphy?
What percentage of those alternate routes are option 6?
Yes. I have more raw numbers. Sometimes I think that's a little more impactful. Obviously, option 6 being the most popular and used. Total for the 5 years, 7,005 through the option 6 pathway. Last year, 2021, 1,690.
That means all the other ones combined are 1,500 Yeah.
Yes.
for
Probably
5
not-
years.
Probably not. For 5.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Darnell. Just for my report, I just wanted to say it's great to be back in person and do you all think the last time we met, February of 2020, and at least in person. And so since then, I know we've had a lot of changes on the board and staff. And so it's great to be back yesterday for the work session as well as in person today. So thank you for making the time out of your busy schedules to be here, for everyone to be here. At this time, we'll move to the consent items. The following items are listed on the agenda as consent items. A, approval of August 15th, 2022 EPSB meeting minutes. B, Kentucky Christian University program approval, health education and physical education programs, initial undergraduate. C, Georgetown College approval of proficiency plan. D, emergency non-certified personnel program. Does anyone wish to remove any of the items from the consent agenda for further discussion? Having received no requests to remove items from the consent agenda, can I have a motion to approve consent items A through D?
And personnel, I make a motion to approve consent items A through D.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Ray Stansfield, second.
Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve consent items A through D. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. All right. And it passes. Thank you so much, and congratulations to Georgetown College for your approval. So congratulations there. Next up, moving to information item. This item is presented to the board for review and discussion only. This item is presented by Dr. Darnell.
From the EPS, Jason Dietrich, coming from the back of the room. And most importantly, just want to say thank you for traveling here in person for this momentous occasion, actually in person, for quite some time. As Mr. Perry mentioned earlier, and we have had conversations around just the assessment expectation for attaining certification in the state of Kentucky. And I'm most impressed, though, that this board, first and foremost, wishes to protect the standard by which we are allowing individuals to become fully certified teachers. And so upon just looking at the issue at large, we have the Praxis requirement as the assessment currently. And so Mr. Dietrich is going to present just some information for us regarding our candidates and the performance just from quantitative viewpoint, but also just provide ETS perspective on the testing. And so this is just an opportunity for information so that you all will be as informed as possible as we consider looking at any assessments for the entry into the profession. So, Mr. Dietrich, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Associate Commissioner Brown. Good morning, Board. Thank you for having me this morning. I know we've got some technical difficulties maybe, so I'm going to be moving around a little bit, trying to pass through these slides. So my name is Jason Dietrich. I'm a Client Relations Director for Educational Testing Service, and I'm pleased to present to you this morning. That's going a little too fast. Yeah.
It doesn't like that.
Clicker does not like me this morning. I can't present it.
A little bit crucial to
That's a whole lot of data to talk about.
draw it on the whiteboard. Kindergarten style.
We might be here a few days.
It's true.
Okay, so we will work through this. So again, thank you for having me this morning. Just a quick little background around ETS. We are a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1947 by combining the Carnegie Foundation and College Entrance Examination Board, or today known as College Board. ETS is the world's largest private educational assessment and research organization. While we do assessments, Praxis series, GRE, TOEFL, GACE, and some other individual examinations, a large portion of what we do at ETS is educational research. Not many people know that. We were very fortunate to welcome our new president and CEO, Mr. Amit Savak, in June of 2022. Our prior CEO had 37 years with the organization and decided to retire. So Mr. Savak brings kind of a new vision for ETS, going a little more global. Our mission is to advance quality and equity in education for all people worldwide. ETS does develop, administer, and score over 50 million assessments in over 180 countries in 9,000 locations worldwide. Next, Sharon. So just a little bit about myself. I joined ETS in November of 2021, so I'm the new guy. So it's been just under a year. I did retire from Nevada with 30 very meaningful years of experience there. Held certain positions in educational leadership as Director of Educator Development, Licensure, and Family Engagement. I was also the Executive Director for the Nevada Achievement School District. And right at the end of my career, I was Deputy Superintendent for the Educator Effectiveness and Family Engagement Division. So similar to Associate Commissioner Darnell. I was also in a similar role to those of you on this board. I did sit on the Nevada Commission for Professional Standards for 6 years as an ex officio member, so non-voting, but it was also the responsibility to chair the work of that commission. So I've kind of sat in your seat and I know what you're grappling with. Also, I was an executive board member for NASDAQ. I'm sure this group may have heard of NASDAQ. And I think the accomplishment I'm most proud of is being an educational thought partner and a steadfast advocate for children. So on today's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the field, kind of the happenings and options out there, the internal ETS test development process, some Praxis data that we pulled together, Kentucky specific, also looking at the national landscape. And then I'm leaving behind some resources and supports within the information that will be given to this board. So, next chart. So around the country, the need for qualified teachers is growing at an alarming rate. Teacher pipeline is shrinking. Educators are leaving the workforce. This is no longer a small problem. It's no longer a state here, a state there, right? It's becoming a national epidemic. states are currently looking for any and all possible ways to reduce both real and perceived barriers to entering the profession. And I say real and perceived. Okay, we will kind of get into that a little bit through the presentation. It should come as no surprise that several states have opted to remove testing requirements altogether as they perceive the test as a barrier. So in recent months, the state of Iowa has removed all testing requirements. State of New Mexico removed the Praxis core requirements, and they're on a phased out plan for Praxis subject area between now and 2024. I will tell you, these were legislative endeavors, and there is quite a bit of consternation in some of those states around those requirements being removed. So time will tell whether those requirements will come back or whether they will remain in the latter. I will say Mississippi did a waiver of sorts to opt out of Praxis examinations for a period of time during COVID. They allowed that waiver to expire. They felt that it was necessary to bring those testing requirements back. So it's kind of a different conversation, right? You're seeing both sides of that. Other states have also taken different paths over just testing removal. They began to think deeply of how to measure a just qualified candidate in a different way. So over the next few slides, I'm going to give a very high level overview of 3 different paths that have been taken. What I will say to this board, if there's interest in any of these pathways moving forward, I would be more than happy on behalf of Associate Commissioner Darnell and the department to come back and present in depth on any of them. The reason I'm not doing that today is they're about an hour and a half presentation. So let's talk a little bit about performance assessments. So at ETS, we have a product called PPAT. The other national vendor, if you will, which is Pearson, they have a product called EdTPNA. They are similar in nature. Obviously, I have a little more internal knowledge of our PPAT because it is an ETS product. So PPAT is a performance assessment. It was built for the profession by the professionals in the field. Our newest version of PPAT assessment is a performance-based assessment developed for beginning teachers. PPAT is composed of 4 tasks. The assessment is designed to be integrated into the student teaching experience and provides ongoing feedback, allowing candidates to learn and improve their skills. EPAT was initially designed to improve flexibility and ensure the use of the assessment could address all required content areas. So I'm going to pause there for just a moment. While PPAT is not assessing content knowledge like a Praxis 2 examination, it is integrated within the PPAT assessment. As we go through the talking points, you'll kind of see how it goes, but I wanted to give that differentiation. Okay. The assessment tasks require candidates to model subject-specific academic language and to base lesson plans upon appropriate state and national content standards. Tasks are scored by raters with expertise in the subject matter being taught, so they can adequately and fairly judge the quality of a candidate's content-specific pedagogy. So I'll pause there for a moment. So again, they're not taking necessarily a Praxis 2 at this point in their career path, but they are being judged and measured and graded on content knowledge and how they're displaying that through their academic language. EPAT assessment tasks are designed and embedded in the clinical experience. For each task, the assessment asks candidates to provide contextual factors that are considered during instructional planning. Each task builds on the former instruction and learning, as well as on the background and information and knowledge of students. Tasks 2 and 3 of the board require direct emphasis on assessment and instructional delivery. So it's pretty intense for the candidates through the student teaching experience, but it's a very reflective model that allows them to get pretty much immediate feedback as to how they're doing. Task 4 requires candidates to put all the components of quality teaching together The assessment was intentionally designed to pull out specific parts of teaching cycle for focus and self-reflection, but it ultimately measures a candidate's ability to move through the cycle and master each phase. PPAT is scored by a pool of certified raters. Approximately 50% are from the P12 realm, and 50% are teacher educators. We do pull these individuals for scoring from around the country. Tasks 2 through 4 are scored by different raters, providing candidates with the benefit of feedback for a minimum of 3 expert educators. So it's an interesting model that we utilize. So each task requires a written response to a series of prompts and submission of artifacts and evidence. Task 1 is formative, tasks 2 through 4 are summative.
Am I able to ask a question?
Sure.
So you were talking about on the first slide, kind of covered that this does use content to assess skills. A lot of feedback that I personally hear about Praxis exams is that the content being assessed on the Praxis is not necessarily appropriate to what the teacher might be teaching. So if you have an elementary teacher taking an exam, they know, that they're K through 5, they don't have any other certification, but then they're getting questions about things that they most certainly know they would not be teaching. Do you feel that that process is more in line with specific skill sets that would be needed to be an elementary school teacher or a middle school or a high school teacher, like throughout the process of doing the evaluation, that it's more aligned to what they would be teaching? Because an elementary teacher, for example, might not need to know about dynasties or different things like that. That might not, because they don't know that information, doesn't mean that they're not a capable teacher. So do you find the content aligns more directly to what the applicant would be teaching?
Thank you for the question. So a couple things. Being mindful that PPAT is not a content assessment. So basically, it's going through the motions, and it is judging or reviewing how an educator performs under that content area while through the student teaching model. Okay? Where there might be a disconnect in some states or jurisdictions around the actual subject area examination of the Praxis 2, kind of depends upon the grade level of licensing. So the elementary exam is based off of a K6, can go into a K7 realm. Okay, some states, as Kentucky, a K11.
Well,
Ish.
yeah.
Okay.
It's not an even yet, but largely, I guess.
Okay. So if you're more based in a K5 realm at this state, so you may have content in that Praxis examination that overextends that 5th grade level, and that could be what you're referring to in relation to taking that Praxis exam. It's kind of hard for an assessment vendor to meet the needs in a specific assessment for every state specific without doing state custom programs. And what I will say to that is things of that nature can be done. It is exceptionally expensive to the state or the candidate to do so. So we have to go with kind of the widest breadth, if you will, in relation to the licensure level areas going across the country. I hope that kind of geared a little bit.
Yeah.
So on the PPAT, we did mention the 4 tasks. So the first one is the formative task, which is knowledge of student and learning environment. Tasks 2, 3, and 4 are summative. So you have assessment and data collection to measure and inform student learning. You have designing instruction for student learning and implementing and analyzing instruction to promote student learning. Those are kind of your key 4 tasks or areas under the PPAT. I will also forward along to this board, kind of in the artifacts that I'll leave behind today, a full PPAT presentation that really digs in the weeds as far as what PPAT can offer. Now, some states, I will say, with PPAT, they've integrated it either as an option to the Praxis subject area, So you could do your PPAT through your student teaching model, or you could take your Praxis subject area examinations. A lot of states are kind of going that option method, if you will. Allows a little more flexibility for candidates. Some states have gone where they've eliminated Praxis subject area examinations and gone solely with a PPAT model.
What's the cost of this in comparison to taking the exam?
Sure, great question. So PPAT runs $300 to $350, depending upon a few little components to it, but it's basically $300 to $350
For the
Now-
entire process?
for the entire process of PPAT. Now, PPAT also offers a resubmission window. So if there's a portion or a section of PPAT that you are not successful with, you do have a resubmission window, and then I believe it's a $50 fee for the resubmission and regrading of that specific task. The Praxis subject area examinations, they kind of have an average of about $130.
So they can resubmit just a specific task.
Yes. Yep. But it is on a very rigid schedule. So there is a rigid timeline for resubmission windows, and if they do miss that window, they'll have to wait till the entire next cycle. PPAT.
Can you give us some of the other states who are doing the option of like both methods?
Sure. So like right now, New Mexico is starting to function under this model. We're working with Utah. Now Utah's a very interesting state when we talk about PPAT. Utah has expanded PPAT to also go across as alt certs. So they call it their Apple program. So if anybody who's traditional or alt, they take the PPAT as an option to Praxis subject areas. And I think it depends upon the candidate, right? Some people are just amazing test takers. They can get right in there, a couple hours, they've taken their test, they're good to go. So it's a great option, right? You have other individuals that may garner better learning themselves going through a process like PPAT through their student teaching model. So it kind of depends on the candidate. That's why I threw it out there, like a lot of states are looking at it as an option too.
What is this like, I guess, as far as like reciprocation between state to state? Like if we had someone complete this, but they wanted to go teach in Tennessee, you know, is this honored? Or if we want to recruit teachers from out of state, would they have to, I guess if we add this in addition to Praxis, then they could kind of choose their route. But are you seeing any issues of people going this route, not getting hired in other states, or making it more complicated to be hired in a state?
So,
So one thing to keep in mind with, and Jake can be able to talk more about maybe what states their tests and they have. In Kentucky, we have in statute that all new certifications have to pass an assessment exam. Now, if someone is coming from out of state, there is an exception for them if they have 2 years of certified experience out of state, and then we would not have to require them to take the Kentucky test. However, if they have less than that and are coming from out of state, then yes, by statute, they would have to take our test. Now, if they were in Tennessee and Tennessee happened to have the same test for that area that we required in Kentucky, and it was still within that recency window, we would approve that. However, we do see a lot of states have different tests that are out there. Another thing that this board will be hearing about is some work that is happening on the national level. NASDAQ's been working with the Department of Defense and the Council for State Governments regarding the Interstate Teaching Compact, which would assist these individuals that are moving across state lines. It originally started with military spouses, but it's looking more broadly. That is still kind of in the works and down the road a little bit. But in regards to testing, that's what we have in statute. And then, Jason, I'm assuming a lot of states have different. I don't know how the PPAT is working with them.
I was asking because I am from another state. Well, I'm not from another specific, but I got my degree in Tennessee. They offered the EdTPA. I chose not to take it because of the way that the Praxis exams worked. I've never taught in Tennessee, so I take all the Tennessee, get my initial certification, then transfer. And financially, I took like 8 or 9 Praxis tests between Tennessee and Kentucky. So I just was kind of asking, I want to make sure it's just a factor in decision making to make sure we're good stewards of people's time and resources.
Absolutely, and I'll kind of expand on here. So if you kind of look back in history a little bit, EdTPA and EPAT, both of those assessment products, were really kind of developed initially to work at the EPP level. So your college prep, okay? It's turned into, over the years, as a licensing option. It's kind of just flowed down to that level. You have many states out there that will not reciprocate licenses based off of EdTPA or PPAT because they are not a formalized Praxis examination, if you will. So it's kind of a double-edged sword if you think about it, right? It's great for Kentucky if you had internal teachers here in Kentucky that took PPAT and moved through the process. Because a lot of states won't take that license without testing if they were to leave Kentucky. So that's kind of a retention, if you will, to some individuals. But on the downside, if you've got individuals that took PPAT or EdTPA in another state, trying to bring them into Kentucky, it's a barrier. Because now they have to go and take the associated Praxis examinations required by that state. So it can work either way. Great questions, thank you. So I think I'll take a moment here now and speak to multiple measures. This is another conversation that's kind of floating around in the ether out there in the educational community. Several states have taken this different approach to examinations and to the pass-fail conversation. Delaware and Montana have both been trailblazers in the multiple measures work. For the presentation today, I'm going to focus a bit on Montana as they work closely in partnership with us at ETS, and I have a little more working knowledge of their program. So what you see in front of you is a very simplistic slide of the methodology of multiple measures in the state of Montana, working with ETS and the University of Montana. Now, I will tell you I'm going to completely oversimplify this model during the presentation. Montana has a Praxis working committee, which is comprised of Praxis representatives from every institution they have in the state that kind of works through the modeling of how they do multiple measures and works on their rubrics and matrix, but they have done an incredible job. So it is just another pathway to look at. So in front of you are 3 basic photos here you're seeing. So under multiple measures, they look at performance in content. So your GPA in your content area, your teaching content during student teaching. So how well you're performing under that content in that student teaching model, and a score on the required licensure examination. Next slide, Chair. So this will go a little bit deeper. So what you're seeing here, this is specific to ELA for licensing. It's just one example I wanted to give. So here on the GPA, they're looking at it and they assign a 0 to 4 points on the scale. They do a 0 to 3 point scale on your student teaching and a 0 to 3 point scale on your Praxis examination. What this really means is if you've got a great GPA and you've done exceptional on your student teaching model, if you've attempted the Praxis subject area examination, even if you fail that examination, if you scored at least so many points on it, you can still be recommended for licensure through this program. So it's a very interesting model. Delaware's is a little more complicated and their rubrics are pretty hard to understand unless you work with them every day. That's why I like to do this path today. It's just kind of a teaser, if you will, of some things that other states are doing around testing being a perceived barrier, kind of judging a little bit better or deeper of what's happening in the student teaching experience, right? And looking at those GPAs or those scores as you're going through your prep program. Next slide, Chair. So the third path, if you will, that I wanted to talk to this board today about is it's a -1 or -2 standard error, standard error of measure, or an SEM. So through the rest of the presentation, I will refer to it as an SEM, standard error. So several states have been working with ETS to utilize a -1 or -2 SEM to potentially allow more test takers to pass the Praxis examination. The standard error represents how well the test score reflects the true ability. It is used to create confidence intervals around a cut score. Since there will always be a chance for false positives and false negatives, adopting a score at -SEM is a way to decrease the chance of false negatives, people who have the abilities needed but don't demonstrate it by meeting the recommended passing score. So I'm going to pause right there for a moment. So you have individuals that have a lot of test anxiety. I myself have test anxiety. Doesn't mean I don't know the content. Okay. So the -1 or -2 SEM conversation kind of allows a standard deviation within that Praxis cut score that was adopted by the board to allow them a little more leniency within that grading scale on the examination. So you're going to pick up additional individuals through that grading that may not have passed just by going traditionally through the cut score. It also, however, increases the chance of false positives. So people who met the score but don't actually have the ability. That is true, but it's not true. It's not a huge deviation within the grading scale. So will you have a few extra individuals that may have gotten through the scoring based off of a 50-50 guess? Potentially, but that could happen on any examinations with or without a negative SEM. As I delve deeper into this presentation, I will share Kentucky data on the Praxis examinations versus the national data and provide examples of how states have found the potential benefits of using this methodology. This is kind of the easiest methodology, if you will, if the state was looking at potentially adopting a method to allow more educators to move through the assessment arena.
So if we're using the SEM and you score below whatever, but you still meet the threshold of the standard deviation, do you have to compensate through your ability some other way to show that you've met the criteria that you are ready for the classroom?
Good question. That would be up to the board.
All right. Are other states doing that?
Yes. So there are a few states that are kind of playing with the -2 SEM, which is a larger reduction. Where if you pass under the -2 SEM, if you're passing at that lower threshold, they do look at where you fell within what would have been the undeviated cut score. And then they would say to your institution, you may need additional support in the content area. So there are things like that could be worked through. On the -1 SEM, that does not tend to be the conversation, because it's still close enough within that first deviation that most states that would adopt a negative SEM1 just allow that to continue through as a passing score. So I'm going to speak just for a few moments about our test development process at ETS. It seems to be kind of a misnomer or commonly misguided information in the field that ETS kind of develops our assessments in a silo. We set cut scores, we push it out to the market and say, here you go, team. That's not it at all. And honestly, as a state client of ETS years ago, I didn't have the in-depth knowledge of the test development process. Kind of very interesting when I joined ETS to realize that it's quite an approach that takes 12 to 24 months to bring an assessment from initial thought, if you will, up through the testing forward test delivery. So we start with a national advisory committee based off of the type of examination you want to put forward. We do job analysis surveys out to the field, so educators that are currently performing in schools in that content area. We bring all that information back to a second National Advisory Committee. After that convening, we turn it into what we call test specifications or a blueprint for the test that we develop. We then put it into a testing form, so a manner in which we would deliver the examination, the method in which we would ask the questions and garner the responses. We then move forward to a standard setting study. It says on here, if needed. 99 out of 100 times we do a standard setting study. This process may be invoked if it was a national standards change, but if the standards were within a certain level of deviation on the examination, we may not actually bring through this grouping. We may just go ahead and make that, minimal change and push it back out through the assessment. But during the standard setting study, states are actively engaged, so states and colleges and universities. Once that all comes back through the standard setting study, which I'll talk about in a moment, the examination goes out and is released to the field. So again, this is about a 12 to 24 month process, generally more 24 months, especially on a new assessment. The 12-month time frame is usually when we're doing, like we just put out a new batch of examinations or regenerated examinations around science standards. So those had to go back through the process, but it was clearly expedited because it was just a modification in a few standards and domains. So a couple things about standard setting study. Once we're ready for that phase in test development, we reach out to our state clients. So here at Kentucky, we would reach out saying X test is launching. We're inviting you to participate in the multi-state standard setting study. We're looking for panelists. The setting study will occur from here to here, and so on and so forth. Generally, what the state client does is they reach out to state EPPs, sometimes education associations, school districts, and we try and garner individuals in the teaching realm and teacher educator realm to join ETS in setting the standards. And I've said setting the standards quite a bit during this conversation. To simplify that is to determine the just qualified candidate and set a cut score. So you have a recommended cut score that comes forward to boards and commissions such as yourself. And that's kind of where it comes from. So the role of those panelists is to judge to the extent to which the knowledge reflected by the content specifications is important for entry-level teachers or just qualified candidates. So you're not looking for the best and brightest when you're doing these examinations, right? You're looking for the content required, call it a first-year educator, first-year teacher in the classroom, that just qualified candidate. So now we're going to talk a little about Kentucky Praxis data. So KDE had requested to see the data from last year around the pass rates of Kentucky test takers on Praxis tests offered in the state. Secondly, they wanted us to compare the Kentucky data to the national landscape and review how Kentucky rated in comparison. Lastly, they wanted us to address the possibility of reducing the passing score by -1 SEM for both data sets. So before we move on here, I'll set the stage a little bit. So under the second, where they wanted us to do a comparison, that's daunting work. So the easiest methodology to do a comparison of exam to exam from Kentucky to the national model is we take the Kentucky adopted cut score, we apply it across all other states that have adopted that same examination and get a passage rate in those specific states and bring it together under a national score. Okay, that's kind of how we do it. If there's additional data that this board would want moving forward, deeper dive into specific areas and things, by all means, we can make that request and I can certainly make that happen. But I just wanted to kind of set that stage a little bit of where we're getting that national number from. So it really is kind of apple to apple because the cut score is the same. Okay. All right. So under the Kentucky data, there's a few parameters here that I want to set. All data presented is based on a candidate selecting Kentucky at the state or program level for score reporting. So we say self-reporting. So if you have an individual that goes out and registers for a Praxis exam and doesn't link it to the state of Kentucky under an EPP or under licensing, they're not in the data set. They're just kind of out there in the ether. Okay. We looked at pass rates and adopted cut score and a -1 SEM. Testing period is September of 21 through August of 22. And for the purpose of this presentation today, we did the highest score, meaning final completion of the examination. So what this does not account for in this data is if somebody took a Praxis subject area exam multiple times. And we did include include all delivery methods. So this would be site-based testing centers and at-home testing. Now, those of you like me that need them, here's where we have to put the glasses on. I'm just going to show you yeah, that's why this is being emailed to you. So just to give you an idea here, I'll just take agriculture as the first line item here. So Kentucky has a passage rate for ag Praxis at 90.48%. That's a really high passage rate. If we were to do a negative SEM score, your passage rate would jump to 92.86. However, what's of note here is you would have only garnered one additional pass candidate based off of that negative SEM. Look at a couple more, like your elementary education multiple subject science subtest. You're at an 80.12. At a negative SEM1, you would be at 87.68. Kentucky would garner an additional 100 candidates for passage of that examination.
I'm sorry, I have another clarifying question.
Sure.
So because this is only done off the candidate's highest score, how accurate is this? Because what if they took the exam like previously and got a lower score? Could that be adjusted? Like maybe they wouldn't have had to retake the exam. Does that make sense? Like that's
Right, I see what you're saying. So if you had somebody that was right on the cusp, so of the current passing score under the adopted cut score versus a -1 SEM, I think what I'm kind of hearing here is like ETS would have the ability, if this board in the future were to adopt a -1 SEM model, to come back with data for those candidates that would have now been considered passing under that -1 SEM and provide you the data of those educators back to the department. So if it was done retroactively in that case, the department could contact those individuals and tell them they'd be eligible for licensing. So the reason we don't do your multiple test taker scores within a data set like this, again, it's self-reported. Many individuals, when they're taking their first Praxis examination, do not list the EPP or the state. It's pretty common for them not to do that. So the data would be fairly skewed. We get more accurate data, more accurate self-reporting. If you're kind of getting towards the end of their education pathway and they're taking the Praxis exam, they tend to be a better reporter. So there are 3 slides of this type, specifically around Kentucky data, which again will be presented to you in the package because it is a little difficult to read. Sharon, could you go down to the next presentation slide? There we go. So now let's kind of set the parameters around the national conversation. So the data presented is based on a candidate selecting a state at the state or program level. So same caveat, they have to select Kentucky or an EPP. We take the adopted Kentucky cut score, we apply it to all states utilizing the specific examination and compare the passing data. We do have the same parameters around highest score, all testing modalities, and the same testing year. So September 21 through August 22. Sharon, could you go to the next slide? So now let's look at agriculture here, okay? And I'll be able to give you the comparison numbers. So here, on a national, agriculture is 92.62. With a negative SDM, they would be at a 95.78. Kentucky was at a 90.48. So Kentucky candidates specific to agriculture did not perform as well on that specific examination as the national. But that is an anomaly within this data. And that's why I kind of picked that agriculture. Overall, looking at this data set, Kentucky performs exceptionally well against the national data. Your test takers do seem to pass at higher rates than the national average. Let's look at that same science. So on the national, the elementary science passage rate is 77.34. It would be 85.29 on a -1 SEM. And just to refresh you, you were at 80.12 with a negative SEM 87.68. Now what I've done is I've gone through and I've selected two specific examinations for us to kind of really look at. So Sharon, if you wouldn't mind going to the sampling. There we go.
As she's pulling that, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Is there data available on the comparison of the number of attempts by Kentucky students versus the number of attempts across the country for these tests?
I can definitely pull you the Kentucky data, yes. When we're looking at a national model, you're talking about 40 jurisdictions. So what I would generally encourage boards and or state clients to do is maybe look regionally. So if there were certain specific states within a region you want me to pull that data. If the board truly did have an appetite for that national data, not to say that we can't do it, it just couldn't happen, in the next 2 weeks.
Would you also be able to layer in the cost? Because every retest is a different cost depending upon which one you're taking. Would you be able to layer in the cost implications for those retakes?
That would be a little difficult.
Okay.
That's why we tend to use the average of $130 per examination.
Sure.
So what I would ask maybe, if notes are being taken today during this presentation, that comes through with a data request from the department with the specific parameters you're asking for. And by all means, I will try and meet every data element you're requesting.
Careful about that offer.
But that's what we're here for.
Fair enough.
So let's kind of focus just a little bit. I know there has been some discussion around the department, kind of out in the field, talking about social studies and PE, those two specific examinations. So if we look at Kentucky social studies, you're at a 75.53. If you went to a -1 SCM, you would be at an 81.38. Now, what I was hearing was, 75 is not a good pass rate for that examination. We really need to look at this. The next line item, if you look at the national compared with the Kentucky cut score, nationally, they're scoring 63.52%. So Kentucky is far above the national rate for passage on the social studies examination. Far above. Now, to be mindful, if you did adopt a -1 SEM, you would have garnered 11 additional candidates there. And I know some of those numbers may sound small, but when you start talking, maybe 8 here, 10 here, 12 here, those are teachers in classrooms in front of kids. So it is a conversation happening out in the field around -1 SEM because it doesn't dilute the examination or the scoring thereof. It's within a good standard deviation. Now, PE. Kentucky currently passes at a rate of 64.49. We go to a 77.57 based off of the national, which is 50.29 or 66.45. So even though there was concern about this examination as well in Kentucky, you're graduating almost 15% higher pass rate than the national average, which was surprising. Sharon, we'll go to the next slide. So let's talk about a few takeaways here today. As presented, you can see there are multiple pathways for teachers to show content competencies as adopted around the country. Kentucky as a whole outperforms most states across the nation on the passage rates for Praxis content examination. All pathways presented today could be viable options for Kentucky in the challenges of the teacher shortages and can be combined in some cases for maximum flexibility to the test taker. So when I say combining, you're not generally combining multiple measures with a negative SDEM adoption because it's really not warranted in that case. That might actually just convolute the conversation. However, it would be something that could be a combination of PPAT or Praxis subject area examinations. So that way you're picking up those candidates and say, hey, I do great on tests, I'm going to do that. Or, you know what, I'd like a little different experience through student teaching and I'd rather model it through there. The adoption of PPAT is one of the options alongside the current examinations with the adoption of SEM1 could be the most beneficial. And we are starting to see some trending in this direction around the country. One note there is PPAT is an assessment. It is a performance assessment. It is an assessment. So it tends to be a little bit easier for boards and commissions such as yourself to adopt PPAT under standing state statute. So finally, as your client relations director, I would welcome the opportunity to work with KDE and EPSB to provide additional information, presentations, etc. We kind of consider ourselves as a company and myself as a client relations director as a partner with our state jurisdictions in trying to reduce the teacher shortages and barriers. So I think I will conclude there. Again, I will be sending on quite a bit of information to the board through the KDE team. And if there's any questions, my contact information is kind of all over the materials, and I'd be more than happy to address any concerns and take any additional questions you have here today.
While you are thinking about questions that you may have for Jason, I did just want to highlight some of the information in your staff note as well around what you are required to do by statute. So in that summary section with the staff note, it does kind of outline the requirements that are placed in statute by the legislature in KRS 161030, where there does have to be an assessment. However, the ability to determine that assessment is given to this board. So you have the authority to select the assessment, which is where, as Jason was saying, you do have the ability, if you want to accept PPAT, that is an option that this board can do. You also have the ability to set the acceptable scores, set the cut scores for those exams. Currently, you have done this all through regulation, which is 16 KR 6010. But you do have the ability to adopt this standard error of measure or SEM approach through your ability to set the scores. We will get all of this information from Jason. We will send it out to you, and then probably also follow up a note with Dr. Murphy and with Vice Chair Weedman to make sure that we accurately capture your data request before sending this on.
Yeah, I think you were getting more at what I was trying to say with the original numbers. I would just love to see a comparison of how many people would have to actually retake the test multiple times. It would just be nice to know. Yeah, this is slightly out of my wheelhouse, so I just want to make sure I get the full picture of, full student and your due diligence with that. So thank you for entertaining our questions. I appreciate it.
Of course, yes.
Two questions related to the SEM. So in the data that you presented, using the -1 SEM, in one example, 11 more students would have been eligible. So is that because the SEM is a better measure of their actual ability, Or it could imply that 11 more students who would not have been allowed to put through. How is that not a lowering of the standard? The second, so there's a statistical question there. The second is, over what data set is the FCM calculated? Is it just test takers in that given year? And so might that not lead to a group of test takers who test higher in a particular year, some who would have previously met the fixed cutoff, then left out? And likewise, in a given year, if statistically that group of test takers tests lower, the SEM might be a valid measure of that average ability of that group. But if they test lower, might we be including even more students who are further below the current fixed cutoff?
I'll probably take the second one first. So on the -1 SCM conversation, that is determined at the time we put the assessment live. So it's not based year by year.
Okay.
It's something that our psychometricians work through and determine at that cut score value, what that error of measure could be. So I could absolutely get you documentation from one of our psychometrics team in relation to how the -1 or -2 SEM are calculated and what that exactly looks like. I can give an overview to it from them, but I can also probably pin it to a couple of assessments just so that you could see what the difference would actually look like. So again, if we're taking notes here today or it's recorded, I can give that data request.
That would be helpful.
Now you asked something very common that is asked by boards and commissions about whether the standards are being lowered. So technically, the -1 SEM is within a standard error of measure. So we wouldn't necessarily classify it as a lowering of the standards. However, with that being said, public facing, if you will, that does come with it a lower cut score. So optically, to the general public, it could be perceived as if a lower cut score has been adopted. There's clear messaging that could go out around that and so on and so forth. But yes, optically, that could be the case. And I will tell you, in my home state of Nevada, we just had a very similar conversation, and they elected not to deviate and go with the -1 SEM. Because on a couple specific examinations we were looking at there, it would have reduced their cut score optically 8 to 10 points. And they didn't want to do that. Because you have to kind of balance it as a board here, right? So you have to look, okay, that's great. We may garner half a dozen additional candidates in a specific area, but overall, what does that look like?
Thank you.
Not a question, but I guess that is my concern is that, our charge or mission as EPSB is to enforce and establish high levels of or rigorous standards. And I'm fearful that the negative SEM looks that way. Whether it is or not, as you just mentioned. Now, the multiple measures and the PPAT, I feel like those might be something as an option that maybe we can still look at that Praxis too, as well as what does a PPAT look like in combination of those. That's sort of where my mind is. I'm curious to see the rest of the board, but that's where I'm at. Yeah, Dr. Merton.
I think I'm not ready to advocate one way or another, so I'm just adding to the conversation.
Yes.
But standard error of measure is such a well-defined statistical unit that is used in a lot of professions to address and adjust for certifications, credentials, what have you. But I think the other question that admittedly you even shared during your presentation was there's a good test taker bias in these things. And you can have a lot of folks who are really good test takers who may not be good in the classroom. Maybe that leads to multiple measures. I don't know, but I would offer that the counterbalance to considering SEM is that the test itself is not necessarily in isolation the way to measure whether someone's ready for the classroom or not.
I have similar thoughts. Like, I kind of think about it when you are getting your driver's license, you have the paper test, but you also have like the driving, where you get in the car and drive with someone. Which one shows you're more confident? So I kind of see these going hand in hand, with student teaching. We do have those multiple measures. So how much does the paper really tell you versus the experience? Different thought.
I have a quick question. With the PPAT, how is the relationship with like the college or the university that the student is, going through the program and that's part of their curriculum, student teaching, but then you have this component while they're student teaching, is it just like a cohesive relationship between the components of the PPAT and the college requirements?
Great question. So part of it is connected, part of it is not. So your task 1 is scored at your EPP level. Your task 2, 3, and 4 are scored independently as they're going through the student teaching modeling. Now your EPP is clearly involved with the student teaching. So there is information coming back, and there is work that does happen at the EPP level. There's also work that would happen with your cooperating teacher in the classroom. So it's just not as, well, let me return it another way. It's probably more cohesive under PPAT than it is under performance Praxis 2 examination, because that's just a candidate going and taking their examination. There's not feedback. There's no feedback loop there for the ECP. There would be more of a feedback loop under a PPAT discussion. And again, I will be forwarding along the massive presentation for PPAT to this board, and I'd be more than happy to present on PPAT in the future to the board as well.
Any other questions?
You had mentioned that there was a $300 to $350 cost for the PPAT. I would assume that would be the cost by the student, or is there a cost that's associated for the university that goes along with the monitoring of that program and the administration of that program?
Sure. So the $300 to $350 is absorbed generally at the candidate level. Obviously, an institution could embed that as, let's say, maybe a lab fee within a course. So it might be eligible for student loans. I don't want to speak on that, but I've heard some of that occurring out in the field. The fee on the EPP or institutional side is more of a soft cost. So you're looking more at salary for working with those individuals. But they're doing that under the student teaching model anyways. And that's generally a cost associated through the institution as well. So it just kind of folds right in.
Lastly, I know it kind of varies, especially if someone's getting like a ESL endorsement, but do you have an average cut of how many Praxis exams a Kentucky teacher candidate takes?
Just a total number of exams?
Yeah, because I'm thinking if the average person that's going to go the Praxis route has to take 4 or 5 Praxises, that's $500 versus $350. So is there an average number about?
I don't have it currently with me for Kentucky. That is something we could put in the data request for. But your average, so you have to look at, let's take it from the infancy as they're going in and declaring their ed major, right? Working with an institution, moving on through. So you have Praxis Core or GRE, which is accepted here in Kentucky for your entrance examinations, okay? So those are not part of your subject area or your PPAT if you're going down that path, okay? Those kind of sit to the side. So now you have PPAT, which let's call it $300. I generally say closer to the $350 because that allows a candidate to understand they may have a submission pack that they have to do for that $50. But if we keep it at $300, your average individual would then have to take a PLT in Kentucky and a subject area examination. So you're about 280-ish around curriculum right there. That's with a first-time pass both examination.
How would this work for, like your middle grades teachers that are certified in multiple areas that may be taking multiple tests? Is this going to accommodate that?
PPAT can accommodate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess too, like, because I'm middle school certified, I had 2 placements. So you would just still do, like I had to do language arts and social studies. So the PPAT would just be in one of those areas, or it would combine a little bit of both.
So I think that would depend upon this board here in Kentucky, because you would have to look at that, the requirements under student teaching versus the requirements for the passage of an examination, or what that content needs to look like for passage. That's getting definitely in the weeds, which we could do if this board, started going down the path that they were looking at about a potential adoption of PPAT. Then we could bring in some of our specific, like assessment developers and things here to the table and really dig in the weeds of the board on some of those.
But just to reiterate, you said it several times, I just want to make sure. So the PPAT tasks 1 through 4 clearly assess the craft of teaching. You understand student learning, assessment towards learning, instructional design, implementing and assessing and analyzing the instruction itself. So the craft of teaching is being measured, but it doesn't measure at all anything related to content knowledge.
Not at an assessment level, meaning a Praxis level, not to that in-depth level, but it does utilize that content knowledge as you're developing your lesson plans, providing instruction. You're going through part of PPAT, you have to do video courses, you're actually teaching, and you're being observed teaching in that specific content area.
But it's not assessing your knowledge of that content, and it's only in one content area, correct?
It does assess it to an extent, because as I stated in the materials, the individual of grading the PPAT would be in that content specific area. So if you were a social studies teacher and you elected to go PPAT versus Praxis subject area, one of your grading individuals or in those grading elements, they would be assessing your ability to teach that content specific of social studies. It's not to the depth of taking the Praxis 2 examination where you're solely measuring content. But what PPAT does is it gives a look at that holistic person, not just do they know the content area, but hey, how are they in front of kids? What do they look like teaching?
So would you say it's more a replacement for student teaching observation then? Because that's what it feels like.
Observations hold a different place. I'd say it's a tool to go along with observation, but it could also garner that personal license at the end if it was brought into the fold in Kentucky.
Yeah, my primary concern is the knowledge.
I think we're finding kind of as states are adopting PPAT more as they're going through things, I don't think they're nearly as fearful about the level of knowledge measurement because it is within PPAT. What they're finding more is looking at that holistic person, because it's not just a recruitment, right? You've got a retention conversation here. So if you've got educators that are entering the classroom, they may have done great on a Praxis exam, but they get in the classroom and they're just horrific in front of kids, right? So they don't say. And that is a conversation that's happening all over the country. So it does give kind of a snapshot over that student teaching modeling, if you will, kind of how they're going to perform in front of kids. But it does have some definite benefits too. But I can see both sides of it, right? Some people may say, "Oh, you're not garnering enough in-depth knowledge around the subject area." Got to be kind of a give. Now, some states have adopted both, where you have to do PPAT and you have to do Praxis subject area. But I think in the climate today, that would be perceived as instituting an additional barrier. So like I said, it's kind of going one way or the other, or options. Options seem to be a good thing now.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I know this is just the start of our conversation, but I appreciate the information that you've given today and that you will be giving us as well.
Absolutely. I appreciate being here and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So, hey, Chair Mitchell, I had an omission earlier. Dr. Amanda Ellis is not with us today, obviously, but she will be providing a CPE written report that will be sent out to board members. So sorry I missed that.
No worries. I also messed up, and no shade was thrown to Kentucky Christian University and their program approval. So congratulations to both Georgetown and the Kentucky Christian University. So I did not want that to be on record with me favoring one over the other. At this time, we are moving to action items. These items are presented to the board for action and will require a motion and a vote. Action item A is presented by Cassie Triplet.
Good morning. These next two action items are related. These are regulations, new regulations that you all have previously approved. Actually, these were both approved in July, but we will start with action item A, which is 16 KAR 9110, and that is the regulation around the option 9 alternative route to certification. The board did approve the regulation in July. It was filed with the Legislative Research Commission. It was open to the public comment period. We did not receive official comments, but did receive some feedback during that time, as well as some feedback from the LRC staff, some tweaks to the language to better comply with KRS 13A. So starting, the staff note is on page 50 of your agenda book, and the regulation, the suggested substitute is then included starting on page 51. As you'll see, a lot of those changes are just minor language changes that really keep things the same. However, there's a few changes that are more substantive that I did want to draw the board's attention to. We did clarify, and this was based on feedback, that route providers can also include non-public schools. That is similar to our option 6 route. We do open that to those schools as well if they want to partner with a college or university with an accredited ed prep program. Also, some clarification was added to the language towards the bottom of that page, that the requirements of both the field placement hours, the 200 hours that we talked about in the first 2 years, as well as the third-year placement, that all can occur during the employment, which was the intent of the board all along. However, we did need a little additional clarification there. And then also in section 4, under the student teaching portion with that third-year placement. With that, what this originally did was it mirrored the language that is in 16 KAR 5040 around student teaching, and had that very prescriptive language about how you have to place the candidate during that third year, with these split placements. Some of the feedback that we received was that in the employment area that might not be as feasible. So we removed that very prescriptive language to add a little more flexibility for the EPP and the district in this partnership to determine that placement during the third year. However, the other requirements will still remain the same, including the cooperating teacher, the supervisor, and the fact that they do have to be placed in a setting that is consistent with their certification. And again, that would be for the third year. Also, section 8 has been relabeled as reconsideration. The reason for that is to make clear that any final decision of this board is appealable to Franklin Circuit Court. So adding this appeal section in here was really meant as a reconsideration, that if an individual or a program is denied, they can ask this board for reconsideration, but they're not required to do so before the appeal. So just making sure that it was not interfering with that right. And that is the changes, and we suggested substitutes for that. Are there any questions about that, any of those changes? If the board is in agreement with those, and to approve those changes, then we will actually be before the Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee tomorrow afternoon, to answer any questions that they may have as we continue through this process.
Any questions? All right, well, at this time I will need a motion.
Make the motion to approve the suggested substitute to 16 KR 9-110.
So we have a motion and a second. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 9100 alternative route certification institute suggested substitutes. So is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion passes. Thank you. And next we have action item B, also presented by Ms. Trueblood.
Yes, and the next action item here, again, this is another suggested substitute that was based on some feedback that we received from LRC during the review of this regulation that you had approved in July. One thing I will draw your attention to is, once again, that appeals section has been relabeled as reconsideration, just to make that clear. The only other real substantive change, actually two of those that we do have under section 7, making clear that the admissions assessment requirement is not required if you have a terminal degree. That is also included in the statute, but LRC staff felt it would be important to include that there as well. And then with the option 7 guidelines, the board had included language that it is recommended that the provider partner with an accredited EPP and then school district. That recommended language is still contained in the guidelines. However, recommends is not really a term that you can include in the actual regulation itself. So it does say may, that you may partner with, and then the guidelines would still contain that language. Are there any questions on this suggested substitute?
Not necessarily a question, just a comment and a continued comment. For alternative routes in general, at this point, we've got some folks who are required to have EPSB, ESPN. Accreditation approval, and whether that is national or whether that is state only. There are a group of folks who are playing in that game. This represents a group of folks who are not necessarily required to maintain that level of Kentucky-based content assessment review. So I just want to put that comment out there one more time. I would love to see may removed and just go straight to demonstrate, but I recognize that that is not part of our motion today. So I wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, I'll need a motion on action item B.
I'll offer the motion for action item B, 16KAR 9.110 expedited route to certification suggested substitute.
All right, and is there a second? Ms. Nell, that was you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 9110 expedited route to certification suggested substitute.
That was action item A that we just approved. This one is, they are very similar. This is 16 KAR 9, the institute route to certification.
My apologies.
Again, they are very, very similar and right next to each other in the regulation.
Then who messed up there?
I will make it.
I'll let you have it.
But will you go ahead and make the motion just in case?
Action item B. Okay, action item B, 16 KAR 9110 expedited route to certification.
Yeah. Is it on the
It's-
wrong number on
yeah,
there? Okay,
yeah.
so it is 9,100. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, you are reading it correctly. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's the A. That's-
9100.
Yes, that is correct. Apologies for that.
So we both made the mistake. So, Ms. Nell, do you still second?
Yeah.
All right. So the motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 9100 expedited route certification suggested substitutes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, the motion passes. Next, we have action item C presented by Todd Davis.
Good morning, and going back to 16 KR 9110 and KRS 16148, which is the expedited route to initial certification. Lincoln County Schools has partnered with the University of the Cumberlands to develop a proposed Option 9 program in accordance with Section 5 of the regulation. Staff has reviewed the application and found the requirements in the statute have been met, which include some, but not limited to, ensure employment through the candidates position, through the candidates program. So the entirety of the program, they will be employed at the district level or within the district in a classified position. They will utilize experience in the area of the certification. And the option 9 candidate will seek or obtain additional hours above the 200 that are required to complete the program in traditional programs, and they are required to obtain 50 additional clock hours through mentorship prior to year 3. They're required, the requirement of the mentors reporting to the EPPs, the progress of the candidate. They also outline the requirements for admissions into their program above the traditional admission requirements. So they all have to adhere to undergraduate initial requirements for admission to those programs. But Lincoln County is also setting their own standards on who they will accept into the program. As far as the EPP, they'll ensure that the coursework, so there is no reduction as far as the requirement of the bachelor's degree and the initial certification. So all requirements will be met through this program. They're sequenced and allow the 3-year program for completion. They also ensure, along with the district, that the 200 hours are obtained prior to year 3, which is a little bit different requirement in our as opposed to our traditional programs. The university supervisor will provide 4 formal observations during the 3rd year residency. And they also go back to the district. They ensure that that 3rd year they are hired in a classified position where they're seeking certification during that program. And there's a copy in the document library that's been provided for you as well. And they're seeking approval for their option 9 proposal.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Todd, you may have addressed this already, and you did, all of you. What is the distinction? So in where it says the school district and what they're confirming, it has 120 hours of field before the 3rd year. But the regulation, right? Is that the right word?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay, just want to make sure. That's 200 hours before the 3rd
So
year.
it's in conjunction with the district, and we had questions about that as well. So they verified the 200 hours will be met prior to year 3. Some of those are required by the applicant or the candidate to obtain on their own. The additional is through the program itself as part of the requirements of the coursework.
Is that written in this?
In the
We're
proposal,
looking at-
yes.
In the staff note too as well, under the university, what they will do, it has that they will ensure that additional 80.
Okay.
Question, any others? All right, at this time I'll need a motion.
Chairman, I motion to approve action item option 9 for Lincoln County School.
All right, and is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Ms. Berry. The motion before the board is to approve option 9 application for Lincoln County Schools and the University of the Cumberland. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. And last, we have action item D, also presented by Mr. Davis.
I will spare you the lengthy examples. Whitley County has also partnered with University of Cumberland's for their option 9 program proposal. The one difference that Whitley County has included in their proposal is they are limiting their candidates to only those who have completed the teacher leader pathway at Whitley County High School. So the other program, as far as the remainder of the program, it is identical in nature.
Are there any questions? All right, this time we'll need a motion for action item D.
Make the motion to approve the option 9 program submitted by Whitley County Schools and the University of the Cumberland.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Chairman, I second.
Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve option 9 application, Whitley County Schools at the University of the Cumberlands. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davis. The board is now ready to review waiver request KRS 1610281N. Provides that the board has the authority to waive its administrative regulations when a request is submitted by an applicant for certification, a post-secondary institution, or a superintendent of a local school district. When requesting a waiver, the requesting party must submit to the board a written request along with appropriate justification for the waiver. EPSB staff reviewed the waivers with the EPSB's waiver committee during an open meeting immediately prior to this meeting, and the waiver committee formulated recommendations. Brandon Harrod, Sharon Salzman, and Todd Davis will present the waiver request to the full board, and the waiver committee chair, Kathy Gunn, will present the committee's recommendation for final action, starting with waiver A presented by Brandon Harrod.
Thank you, Chairman. The first waiver was submitted by Morehead State University on behalf of Ms. Tamula. Ms. Tamula will have 2 years of the required 3 years to be a cooperating teacher at the time of the placement. She has letters of support from the principal, with the principal stating that he believes that she will be a very successful mentor teacher. And based upon the recommendation and support by the principal combined with the limited number of availabilities of LED qualified teachers, Morehead State University is requesting that the EPSB allow Ms. Tamula to serve as a cooperating teacher, waiving a portion of the 3-year requirement.
Thank you. And Ms. Gunn?
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request and supporting documentation submitted by Morehead State University. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn. At this time, I will need a motion
Make a motion to approve the waiver.
and a second.
Second, Wade Stanfield.
All right. And so motion by Ms. Snell, second by Mr. Stanfield. Motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 5040, request to waive cooperating teacher eligibility requirements for Skylar Ann Tamula. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next, Sharon Salzman will present waiver B.
Good morning.
Morning.
This waiver was submitted on behalf of Northern State University on behalf of Robert Elrod for the instrumental music. I don't know if you remember prior, we had 2 of them for this, but there was an issue, a miscommunication between us and ETS when we adopted the new instrumental and the new vocal. That those were the only two tests that were on the website and not the integrated, which we are still allowing. So when he registered for this test, it was only listed instrumental and vocal. That issue has been fixed, but, so they are requesting that we allow the instrumental music on behalf of the integrated.
And Ms. Gunn?
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by Northern Kentucky University. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn. At this time, I'll need a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve the waiver.
All right, thank you, Ms. Reaver. And is there a second?
Sarah Weedman, second.
Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 6010, request to accept the instrumental music test for Robert Elrod. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next, we're moving to waiver C presented by Mr. Dix.
Chair, waiver C is a request for a waiver 16 KAR 6010 for test recency. Matthew Mickelson completed a Master's of Arts in Teaching program, secondary mathematics at the University of Cumberland this summer. He passed the content assessment in December of 21 and discovered the principles of learning and teaching assessment had expired as of July 21. Mr. Mickelson is requesting that the EPSB allow this previous PLT score to qualify for issuance of his certificate.
Okay.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by the applicant. The waiver committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn. I need a motion at this time.
I move to approve the waiver.
All right, thank you, Dr. Murphy. And is there a second?
Second.
I heard Ms. Snell, or I was looking at Ms. Snell when she said second. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 6010, request to waive 5-year test recency requirement for Matthew Mickelson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next up is waiver D.
Waiver D in regards to the 16 KAR 2120 for the required GPA of issuing emergency certification. Bourbon County Schools has had no qualified applicants for middle school social studies. They have an applicant who has been subbing in the position since the start of school, but the GPA falls below the minimum requirements for emergency certification. The district is requesting EPSB waive the required GPA to issue this emergency certification.
Thank you. Ms. Gunn?
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by the Bourbon County Schools. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Snell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 2120, request to waive emergency certificate requirements for Bourbon County Schools. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next up is waiver E.
Waiver E is also in regards to 16 KAR 2120. Clark County Schools has been unsuccessful finding a qualified applicant for learning and behavior disorders special education teacher. They have a candidate who falls below the GPA requirement and is requesting a waiver of this GPA requirement as well. Additionally, the candidate is completing coursework to qualify for an alternative route program.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request and the supporting documentation submitted by the Clark County Schools. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Snell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 2120, request to waive emergency certificate requirements for Clark County Schools. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next up is waiver F.
Waiver F also related to 16 KR 2120. Lincoln County Schools has no qualified applicants for a middle school science teaching position. The applicant falls under the GPA requirement as well. Currently, the school science class, middle school science class has been being covered by substitutes. And the candidate is also enrolled in coursework, working towards meeting requirements for the Option 6 program.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by Lincoln County Schools. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you. At this time, I'll need a motion.
Make a motion to accept the waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Snell. Do I have a second? Thank you. And the motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 2120, request to waive emergency certificate requirements for Lincoln County Schools. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion passes. Next, we have waiver G.
Waiver G is in regards to 16 KAR 3090. Michael Demera is a certified school counselor in Kentucky and Ohio. He has been employed exclusively in Kentucky schools since 2006 as a school counselor. Over this time, he has been responsible for developing an MTSS and RTI system for Grant County schools and conducting instructional settings and coursework for delivery and instructional design for students, as well as supporting teachers in their work as well in trainings and presentations. Mr. Demera is requesting a waiver of the requirement to obtain the equivalent certificate in Ohio, as also requesting that the EPSB accept the years of classroom experience or classroom instructional experience provided during this time to qualify for the principal certificate. But also, I will add that the candidate has taken the SLLA and successfully passed it as well.
Yeah.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request and supporting documentation submitted by the applicant. After some discussion, the committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you. This time I'll need a motion.
So
Mr. Stanfield, is there a second? Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 3090, request to waive certification requirements for principal certification for Michael Demera. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next up is waiver H.
Waiver H is related to 16 KAR 4030 for the equivalent certification requirement for out-of-state prepared educator. Ellen Kennedy is a Kentucky certified teacher in the area of elementary education. She has completed her education program, all of her education programs through the Indiana University Southeast Indiana, and does not hold an Indiana certification. However, she did hold teaching certification in Indiana in the past. However, after completing her ESL program at IUS, she has not obtained Indiana certification for ESL. She has successfully passed the Praxis 2 assessment for Kentucky and is requesting to waive the requirement of possessing the equivalent certification in Indiana to issue the ESL endorsement for Kentucky.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by the applicant. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
There we have a motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
second, Ray Stanfield.
Thank you. Motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 4030, request to waive equivalent certification requirement for out-of-state prepared educator Ellen Kennedy. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Next up is waiver I.
Waiver I, also 16 KAR 4030. Joshua Miller graduated from the University of Cincinnati in 2021 with a bachelor's degree in special education. He's been conditionally offered a teaching position with Bellevue Independent Schools. Mr. Miller has not yet obtained a high school teacher certificate since he was offered employment in Kentucky. He has taken and passed the Praxis 2 requirement for Kentucky and is requesting the EPSB waive the required equivalent certification for out-of-state.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by the applicant. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant this waiver.
Thank you. At this time, I'll need a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 4030, request to waive equivalent certification requirement for out-of-state prepared educator Joshua Miller. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. And next up is waiver J.
The J, also related to 16 KAR 4030. Priscilla Pereira is a Kentucky certified teacher in elementary education. She completed her elementary program in Brazil and completed her English as a second language endorsement program through Indiana University Southeast of Indiana. Ms. Pereira has never held an Indiana certification and is a Kentucky resident. She is a teacher in Jefferson County and does not intend to seek certification in Indiana. Ms. Pereira has taken the Praxis 2 assessment as well and passed that. She is requesting the requirement for possessing the equivalent certification out of state as well.
Thank you, Ms. Gunn.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request submitted by the applicant. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant the waiver.
Thank you. At this time, I'll need a motion.
Make a motion to approve the waiver.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. This time, the motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 4030, request to waive equivalent certification requirement for out-of-state prepared educator Priscilla Pereira. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. And last, we have waiver K.
Waiver K is in regards to 16 KAR 9080. Jeffrey Stowers is enrolled in a option 6 program at University of Cumberland, has maintained employment with Kenton County Schools throughout the program. Due to health reasons, Mr. Stowers was unable to complete 3 semester hours towards his Master's of Arts in Teaching program in the 21-22 school year. Based on the extenuating circumstances, he's requesting the EPSB approve his request to grant his first renewal of the temporary provisional certificate on 3 semester hours of completed coursework. Mr. Stowers is on track to complete 12 semester hours during the 22-23 school year, which will put him back on target for the option 6 requirements.
The waiver committee reviewed the waiver request and supporting documentation submitted by the applicant. The committee found exceptional circumstances justifying the waiver. Therefore, the committee recommends that the EPSB grant the waiver.
Ms. Gunn, this time I'll need a motion.
Make a motion to approve the waiver.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve 16 KAR 9080, request to waive renewal requirements for option 6 candidate Jeffrey Stowers. During discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. I'll just say that went a lot faster than being online and having to do a roll call. I was glad that went quickly. We have 4 alternative routes to certification applications. The applicants are pursuing the option 1 exceptional work experience route to certification. This is one of the alternative routes established by the legislature in KRS 161048. An applicant with exceptional work experience must have an offer of employment from a local school district, a bachelor's or graduate degree meeting minimum GPA requirements, and an academic major or a passing score on the academic content assessment in the area in which certification is being sought. The board will need to determine if the applicant's work experience constitutes exceptional work experience. The application will be presented by Mr. Davis.
Alternative Route A is in regards to Kenton County Public Schools. They've submitted an application and portfolio for Gina Lagone. The district is requesting that the EPSB approve her application for certification in their area of agriculture's grade 5 through 12. The application and portfolio are included under a separate cover. Ms. Lagone has 20 years of experience in the agriculture field in 4-H youth and as a 4-H youth and development agent. And during that time, she has addressed students or youth and taught environment, soil courses, plant nutrition, plant pathology, wildlife, herpetology, forestry. There's a long list that's included in the document library as well. The applicant does meet the minimum GPA requirements. Kenton County Public Schools offered the applicant a job in agriculture, grades 5 through 12, and the applicant does hold a degree in the area of certification and does not need to take the Praxis 2 exams. The EPSB will need to determine if the applicant's work experience constitutes exceptional work experience.
Any questions or comments on that?
You said 20 years.
20 years.
I just want to hear that one again, 20 years.
There's no questions at this time. I'll need a motion.
Motion.
All right, thank you, Ms. Berry. Is there a second?
Yeah.
All right. The motion before the board is to approve Gina Ligdon for agriculture grades 5 through 12 through the option 1 exceptional work experience route to certification. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next, we have application B.
Application B is Barberville Independent Schools has submitted an application for option 1 through 4, and Andre Lynn. The district is requesting EPSB's approval for the areas of health and physical education grades K through 12. Mr. Lynn has 20 plus years in health and PE as an adjunct professor for Union College, has 18 years of health and wellness personal fitness experience as well. The applicant meets the GPA requirements, and Barberville Independent has offered the candidate the job in health and teaching both health and physical education. The candidate holds the required degree and does not require the Praxis, and therefore the district is requesting approval for exceptional work experience.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? At this time, I'll need a motion. All right. Thank you, Dr. Worcester. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And the motion before the board is to approve Andre Lynn for health and physical education's grades K through 12, the option 1 exceptional work experience route to certification. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Next is application C.
Application C is Mercer County Public Schools has submitted an application for Gina Hopkins seeking secondary earth science grades 8 through 12 and middle school grade science 5 through 9. The applicant has over 13 years experience working for the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Protection as a geologist. And there's a long list of information that she has conducted geological practices for the Department of Natural Resources for Kentucky. The applicant meets the minimum GPA requirement and also holds a degree in the certification area. And asking that the EPSB grant the secondary earth science and middle school grade science certifications.
Any questions or comments? And I will need a motion.
Wade Stanfield.
Thank you. Is there a second? All right, Dr. Wooster, thank you. Motion before the board is to approve Gina Hopkins for secondary earth science grades 8 through 12 and middle grade science grade 5 through 9 for the option 1 exceptional work experience route to certification. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. And last, we have application D.
Application D is from Fayette County Public Schools, submitted an application for Madison McAlmond. The district is requesting certification in the area of family consumer science, grades 5 through 12. The applicant has over 5 years of family consumer science experience as a 4-H youth development extension agent. She has used her research-based teaching methods to instruct community members of all ages in family consumer science areas. She's taught youth through the 4-H camp or program related to cooking, money skills, sewing, life essential skills, etc. Applicant meets the GPA requirements and holds a degree in the certification area, does not need the Praxis scores or Praxis test, and the district is requesting that you accept the exceptional work experience.
Any questions or comments? All right, I'll need a motion at this time.
Make a motion to approve the application.
All right, and need a second?
Second, Wade Stanfield.
Thank you. The motion before the board is to approve Madison McAlmond for family consumer science grades 5 through 12 for the option 1 exceptional work experience route to certification. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Now I will open the floor to any board members or board comments. Does anyone have anything they wish to share?
I just want to say thank you to the staff for the training that you all did yesterday. It was extremely informative and helpful. I think even as someone who's now coming up on year 2 of being on this board, being back in person and being able to see some of the things that you all do behind the scenes was phenomenal. And you all put in a lot of hard work for our teacher prep and our students of the state. So thank you so very much.
Any other?
Second the motion.
I agree with that. Any other questions, or not questions, but comments or statements? Well, I have one, but I was waiting to let you all speak. You can speak after me, obviously. I know that Mr. Perry spoke to us about just legislative priorities and start working in that, sort of thinking through that process for 2023 and especially 2024. I know one thing that I have pushed and probably brought up in most board meetings for the last who knows how many years now is the idea of just re-looking at the K-TIP program, and really we can look at that maybe as a department to revamp that where needed. It has a lot of great things, but I think that when we re-looking at that, but then also maybe pushing for the priority to fully fund the K-TIP program at the state level. I just think that would be a benefit for retaining these new teachers that we have, and what are we doing with those first and second year teachers. And so I know that has been sort of a push that I have had, and I know Mr. Perry sort of brought that up for us to start talking about. And so just to really start thinking about that, as well as any other priorities you see as our board moving forward into the 2023 session. Any other comments? All right, well, it's the time you've been waiting for. At this time, I believe we're ready to go into closed session pursuant to KRS 618101C and J to conduct a character and fitness review and to review potential actions relating to complaints and reports. At this time, I will need a motion to go into closed session.
Motion to go to closed session.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. The motion before the board is a motion to go into closed session. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right. Attorney review, 2, dismiss with prejudice. 3 through 8, attorney review. 9, dismiss with prejudice. 10 through 16, attorney review. 17, admonish. 18, attorney review. 19, admonish. 20 through 22, attorney review. 23, defer for training, educator ethics training. 24, defer for training, anger management training. 25 through 32, attorney review. 33, dismiss with prejudice. 34, admonish. 35 through 47, attorney review. 48, dismiss with prejudice. 49, attorney review. 50, dismiss with prejudice. 51 and 52, attorney review. 53, dismiss with prejudice. 54 and 55, attorney review. 56, dismiss with prejudice. 57, attorney review. 58 through 68, dismiss with prejudice. 69 through 75, attorney review. 76 through 97, dismiss with prejudice. 98 and 99, referred to hearing. 100, referred to hearing. 101, dismiss with prejudice. 102 and 103, defer for training, admin code training. 104 through 112, dismiss with prejudice. 113, defer for training, admin code training. 114 and 115, dismiss with prejudice. 116, defer for training, admin code training. 117 and 118, dismiss with prejudice. 119, defer for training, admin code training. 120 through 122, dismiss with prejudice. 123, defer for training, admin code training. 124, dismiss without prejudice. 125, dismiss with prejudice. 126, dismiss without prejudice. 127 through 129, defer for training, admin code training. 130 and 131, dismiss with prejudice. 132 and 133, defer for training, admin code training. 134, dismiss with prejudice. 135, attorney review. 136, defer for training, educator ethics training. 137 through 142, attorney review. And 143 through 144, dismiss with prejudice. At this time, we will go and vote on individually on these cases, and we'll begin.
Sarah Weedman, yes on all.
Amber Snell, yes on all.
Timothy Worcester, yes on all.
Susan Reaver, yes on all.
Diane Berry, yes on all.
Meredith Goodman, yes on all.
Kathy Gunn, recuse myself on educator case 31. Yes on all others.
Justin Mitchell, yes on all. And at this time, I will need a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Snell, and second by Ms. Berry. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And motion passes and we are dismissed.